The world of work has a demographic problem, but most organizations and their leaders are kind of pretending it doesn't exist. We are living longer, we are working longer, and yet somehow we are still building and running organizations that behave like careers end at 65 with a cliff where you just stop working fully one day. We're practicing subtle and frankly not so subtle ageism for anybody in their 50s. And in the meantime, we're seeing experience walk out the door. Younger workers, there aren't enough of them to fully fill the gaps. And the people in the middle are being stretched thinner and thinner. We talk endlessly about the future of work, particularly related to topics like AI and flexibility and culture. But we're missing one of the biggest shifts that's happening out there, and it's kind of hiding in plain sight. The workforce is getting older, and it is also getting more complex. So what if the future of work isn't young or disruptive, but gray? Today's guest, Dan Pontefract, is making a point that we're facing something he calls the age debt, a slow-building crisis that organizations aren't prepared for. But he also sees an opportunity. What if experience isn't a liability to manage, but an advantage to unlock? In his new book, The Future of Work is Gray, he challenges everything we think we know about generations and career journeys and what it really takes to build organizations that work for everyone and for the long run. I'm J.R. Lowry. This is Career Sessions. Dan, thank you for joining me on the show today.
Thanks, JR. It's a thrill to be here.
I appreciate that. And congrats on your new book, The Future of Work is Gray. It's out this week as we are recording. Let's get into it. So you talk about something you describe as the age debt. What's the simplest way to explain that to the uninitiated?
Kind of like head in the sand of four key things: demographic change, ageism, an inability to see and how to capture wisdom, and the fact that we're living longer, but no one is prepared for it.
So, you hit at this point that we're kind of living in the world of the past, right? Where people retired at 65. It was kind of a hard cutoff. You went from working full-time one day to trying to figure out what to do with your life the next day. And that's not really how people want it so much anymore. But most organizations and their leaders are still kind of operating in that world. Why is that?
Well, it's a cracking of the code I was trying to do within the book, and I still don't have an answer, quite frankly. I'll say two things. First of all, there is a antiquated way of thinking that has just leached itself onto the point, like, what is the definition of retirement? It happens, in Japan at 60. It happens in Germany at 62. In North America at 65. And it's just like, well, that's how we've always done it. The organizational and societal kind of norms are that. And that's kind of a problem, I would say. But the second thing is individual. We sort of continue to think, oh yeah, there's this golden watch date, I'm 65 or whatever the date is. And you're like, and then I'm going to be free. And so you find, I'm sure you see these stories, JR, like lots of individuals, a year, 2 years in, they're like, well, geez, A, I'm bored out of my mind. B, I am lacking a sense of purpose for whatever it is I want to do next, because I've done enough golf and gardening to fill an entire Mars planet up with. And then 3, they slowly kind of look at their 401k or other savings. They're like, that's going down faster than I thought, or I didn't save enough. What am I going to do now?
And I think, look, I'm at that point in my life. I was working a corporate job up until about a year ago. I've now run my own business. The question is that all I do, or do I fill other things around it? I wasn't ready to quit working, and yet I was kind of thrust into that model. And it becomes, as I'm sure you found out in doing the research for your book and maybe personal experience, it gets a lot harder to find work when you get older. And there is a lot of ageism out there. And it just doesn't really feel like the world is geared for taking advantage of people who are like me. Not that this is about me, but people who want to keep working, maybe less than full time and maybe in a more flexible way, but not just flip the switch completely off.
You're spot on, JR. So whether you've been involuntarily removed from your role and or organization at the same time, and you're like, whoa, I didn't expect that. So we as individuals, and also again, back to organizations, are creating these constructs that are from the 60s, 70s, and it's still there today. And that is, the only way to grow your career is to go up the career ladder. And even if you don't go up the career ladder, you might get stuck halfway there, then you're stuck. And then that day comes when you no longer can work for us and we're going to get rid of you, or you unretire yourself from the role you've had. And it's just like, is that really the only way? And so I blame tons of folks. I blame senior leaders in the C-suite whom have collected enough of those monies and retirement savings to not care. Just like, well, whatever. This is never going to affect me. I don't worry about the other 95% of the organization. I blame HR, P&C, people and culture, because again, they have not really paid attention and or shoved this under the rug and the carpet, so to say, about what is good culture these days, and then are they planning appropriately for the talent conundrum that they will face from the absolute demographic math that is going to math very soon in North America. So there's lots of blame to go around, but then thirdly, the individual. When I'm doing my therapy and counseling sessions for those that reach out and say, hey, I've just been whacked by name your tech company or name your organization. What do? I put 58 resumes and applications out. I'm not getting any callbacks. Well, one of the other things we got to be thinking about as individuals is transferability and those skills that you have that you might have to lift and shift over to another industry, another role, another type of job that you never thought of, but you're smart. You've got scars and you've got wrinkles from all these good experiences. You can transfer those to another type of opportunity that you might not be thinking about. So there is blame to go around a lot of different ways.
So what's the biggest consequence of this that you're seeing in the organizations right now because of the fact that they're not really adapting?
Well, everyone's love-hate relationship with Boeing is a pretty good real-life example. So you've seen over the last 10, 12 years, multiple incidents that are public, let alone the ones that you don't know about. And so one thing you can think about from a Boeing perspective, and they've been public in Congress hearings, et cetera, about what is it that's gone wrong. One of the issues is the fact that they've both had voluntary and involuntary departures from a lot of these mechanic roles, operational roles, production roles, et cetera. And so not only did they lose wisdom that was chopped at the block, again, either they chose to leave or they didn't, then they've had to kind of backfill and figure out, well, where's that wisdom and how do we train new people into these roles? And so things are getting missed and things are lost and things weren't recorded. And so we didn't have any transfer of that wisdom, let alone the capture. And so there's just one company of a gazillion where we could go into and say, you know what? There might be real life consequences or real business economic consequence if we are not thinking about talent in different ways. So what could Boeing do? So I'll give you an example with BMW, who's doing it much better. Same thing. They make cars. They don't make planes, right? It's same but different. So BMW in Germany took a look at their aging workforce and said, we got a lot of folks over the age of 50, not a lot of young folks coming up. In fact, Germany has one of the lowest birth rates in all of Europe. And so like, we don't have a lot of immigration happening. What are we going to do? And so they start a program called the Senior Expert Program. And the Senior Expert Program is a way for them to build up the skills of the middle-age leaders and individual contributors so that they know they're going to actually move up into these new leadership roles. And the people who are in the existing roles, who might be older or what I call Rubies, they're offered the opportunity to stay full-time or in kind of contract way or part-time way, whatever they wish, to still be at BMW well into their later life. And so that's a conscious decision of a C-suite saying, how can we take care of our organizational talent and repurpose it in different ways?
Yeah, and I'm sure there are lots of examples of companies that are starting to wake up to the fact that in most of the developed world, more people are aging out of the workforce than are coming into the workforce. Got this whole immigration debate that's going on in many places. And so without immigration, the math is the math, more people leaving than coming in. And it's going to create at some point a labor shortage. Now, maybe that's what people want. At the same time, we've got all this AI stuff going on and people saying we don't need as many workers as we used to have. And maybe the math will end up working out for them, but it's a big gamble.
Yeah, when it comes to artificial intelligence, to me, it's A, too early to tell. B, it's a bit of a red herring because tech had overhired during COVID and post-COVID, and so now they're just sort of trimming the books, I would say, and that's getting all the mainstream media headlines. And if you look at the actual data that says, is AI doing anything to replace young, middle-aged, or older workers, it's nowhere near that. It's in fact complementary rather than replacement. But that being said, there are actual examples whereby organizations are not hiring young people. So my book is for all ages, really. So when young people aren't being offered those out of school internships or first time roles, and then they're off doing jobs where they're overqualified for, indeed, those organizations that aren't doing the hiring and they're sort of preventing that friction learning from happening that young people need to get in order to become more senior experienced people down the road, that I would suggest leaders need to take a good hard look at from that perspective. Now, flip it to the other end, to your earlier point, JR. When we make rash decisions about workforce dynamics or talent composition, and then we're just looking at EBITDA, let's say, and saying, you know what, JR and Dan, you two are making 200 grand a year. That's 400. We're going to get rid of you two and we're going to replace it with a 70K individual. So a 2-for-1, and we're going to save, what is that, 330 grand. Okay. Now, could you possibly maybe work with JR and Dan in a way that is, first of all, humane, but B, looking at that talent composition as, well, maybe you could get 2-for-1. Those two, maybe they want to work 50% each for like 3 or 4 or 5 years. And so the 200 grand each is 100 grand or even less. And you're just looking at the economics of your cost and P&L essentially differently so that you don't lose immediately and 100% all of that wisdom and the tacit knowledge that's basically walking out the door. So both ends of the spectrum, you can see organizations not planning for that demographic inevitability. And with immigration cuts in both Canada and the US from a North America perspective, you will see, like it is inevitable that the over 50 crowd is increasing at a rate faster than the under 30 crowd. For those organizations not thinking about the longer term, you are going to be in for a world of hurt.
How much of this, though, do you think is exacerbated by the fact that you've got just this incredible financial pressure that most companies feel to drive better returns, to have consistently improving quarterly results, to squeeze as much out as they can, whether for the shareholders or senior management or both, and just pushing that experience out the door because it is viewed as expensive and maybe not as productive as they would like it to be?
We were chatting what I'll call in the green room before we started recording, and I was mentioning how this is, rightly or wrongly, my 6th book across the library of Dan Pontefract books. 10 years ago, my 2nd book published, it was called The Purpose Effect. And in that book, I basically speak to 3 types of purpose: personal purpose, role purpose. So do you have a sense of purpose in your role at work? And organizational purpose. Now, why do I bring that up? Because it's been 10 years since that book. In the organizational purpose thesis that I suggested, organizations whom continue to sort of align with Milt Friedman's shareholder primacy theory, which is essentially at all costs, serve the market or the profit seekers for the quarter, which is AKA known as short-termism, then you will rue the day downstream if you're thinking so short-sighted and thus with short-termism, not thinking about the better health of your org over time. And so we've seen examples of this in the last decade where organizations who are myopic and just thinking in the short term have either fallen off the cliff from a Fleet Street or Fortune 500 perspective, or they've had to do remedial efforts to try and save where their economic value and output is. They might not be as innovative. Examples could be things like Research in Motion and BlackBerry. There's one perfect example whereby they weren't thinking it through, and then what happened? Everything was for the short term, and the company almost went belly up. Now, what my point is there, JR, you take that short-termism thinking and now layer on the demographic inevitability that your workforce is shifting from a bell-shaped demography to a light bulb-shaped demography, less people in the bottom, way more up at the top. What are you going to do? You're going to work for the short term, or are you going to think about the health and longevity of that organization for which you work and say, maybe we should be doing things different. Maybe we should do it for the long term, JR. So I think the two 10 years apart are kind of related, but in different ways.
You mentioned Rubies a minute ago, Dan. I know you've got a different framework for thinking about the generations than the traditional ones of millennials and Gen Z and Gen X. Talk a little bit about rivers and rocks and Rubies.
So what's happened for forever, basically, I guess since maybe 1964, is that we have coined individuals in the organization and outside of it by these 14 to 18-year segments. So to your point, boomers, Gen X, Gen Y/millennials, Gen Zs, and now Gen Alphas. And so how is that helpful, first of all, inside an organization who's trying to be innovative, to serve customers, to create a great employee experience? What it just basically does is it takes society's tropes and memes and places them inside the organization, and it just compounds ageism. Now, whether that is ageism directed at young people or middle-aged sandwich workers, as I call them, who have to take care of ailing or dementia-based parents and the young kids that they're raising, or older workers who are just dealing with the fact they're getting older but still at work. So generations actually enforce ageism. And if we were to just take a look at this and say, well, you know what, JR, you and I both perhaps of the same vintage, we went through, like everyone will go through, 3 career eras. So as opposed to generations, all of us, regardless of your age, regardless of when you were born, go through 3 eras. And I call them rivers, rocks, and rubies. So I'm paying homage to basically some early work with a psychologist, Lamotte. He said basically we have 2 types of intelligence. We have what's called fluid and crystallized intelligence. Fluid is when you start, and then that fluidity kind of eventually morphs into crystallized intelligence. So I'm like, not quite. That's not what I see in my role as a people and culture executive for 30 years. I've seen 3 eras or 3 types of intelligence. And essentially, yes, fluid intelligence, or what I call the rivers, that's when you're just getting going. And again, you could be 16 to 30, 16 to 34. It doesn't matter. The number doesn't matter. It's just you're in your young era. But then you start to figure out things. And so in that same river, you start dropping what I call rocks. And so you solidify a little bit. Your river is still flowing around you. You're still fluid, but you have now ideas on how and what works right in the right way because you get context. You develop that, more wisdom. And then as the river continues to undulate around your rocks, those rocks get polished and they actually crystallize over time to become rubies. So you, I, all of us start as a river, become a rock, and then eventually become this ruby. And again, you don't have to use the vernacular, but if you were to just say, oh yeah, wait a second, all our organizations and all our team members, regardless of whether they're born in 1946 or 2026, it doesn't matter. There's these 3 eras and it happens. And so how might we look at intergenerational teams made up of rivers, rocks, and rubies? How might we look at rivers as ways in which we help them become rocks? How might we look at the rubies and say, yeah, you know what? The rubies are shining. We should keep a bunch of those shiny objects around so that we can help rocks and rivers become better employees, et cetera. That's the type of framing I'd love to see.
What's interesting about the whole generational labeling and stereotyping is it's fun, but it's also rife with inaccuracies. You were highlighting a lot of times, with somebody our age, we would have been rivers back in the day, trying to figure out what we wanted to do, meandering through and ultimately figuring out a path that felt right for us and bedding down and becoming one of those rocks. But we look at those kids today, they're kids because they're even younger than my kids are at this point, in their early 20s and think, oh, they're really different from the way that we were. And they're clearly different in the sense that they're digital natives. We weren't. And there are definitely some things that will affect their adult lives relative to what has affected our adult lives. But we blend so much of this stuff, the context of what's going on in the world while you are coming of age. What is relevant to you in your 20s relative to what's relevant to you in your 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s. And the fact that they are somewhat different from what you and I were like when we were in our early 20s. And the problem is when you start unpacking all of that, these differences aren't nearly as big as we make them out to be, but they become an excuse and they become a label and they become a stereotype and they get in the way of people actually figuring out what's the best way to work with everybody as individuals. To me, that's the part about the generational labels that's just flawed.
My dad was born in England during just the end of World War II. And he grew up in an era whereby he put to work at 16. He was in an apprenticeship program. He was an engineer. But they never had TV. They couldn't afford a TV. Their entertainment, if you will, was out and about in the community in England where he lived, but the radio. And so his stories at work were about radios. And so when he enters his rock era with other rivers who now are in Technicolor and can have TV and its color. And now these conversations are happening like, oh, interesting. I never thought about TV that way. My point is, wherever you are, we all have tool change, like whether it's from the radio to the TV to the internet to AI, these tools change. So
yes.
Why is it that we can't sort of evolve our thinking to say, oh, you know what, even though I might be a Ruby right now, can I learn AI? Of course I can. Like, this is not the point, right? Can a river learn about the Beatles and the Stones today? Sure, I think they can. I mean, you can go pick up some catalog of music and say, wow, that's pretty cool music from the 60s and 70s. But see, that's the thing. When we just myopically consider and classify people based on an era where they were born, in my case, between the ages of or years of 1964 and 1980 being Gen X, does that mean that I am not able to enjoy Wet Leg or Wolf Alice or Wolf Parade or Harry Styles these days because they're river bands? No. So the same thing can apply at work, and that's what I'm trying to get at.
You talk about the title of the book is The Future of Work is Gray, and there's an implicit focus on the aging population and what's happening with them. But there's also a lot of ageism of mid-level people, middle managers, others who are in their 30s and 40s. It feels today like they're really under attack. We're trying to thin out management layers, get rid of management numbers in a more general sense. The people who are left end up with 10 or 12 or 15 people reporting to them who they can give no time to. What do you see happening with that population today?
They're the highest on a percentage basis increase in stress and anxiety as a cohort inside of our organizations. So that middle management rock era, those that are, some of them, dealing with, as I mentioned, aging parents and young kids, or kid, given the birth rate collapse, nonetheless are having to deal with, to your point, a spans and layer increase. So not only is there the hollowing out of middle management, it's like putting more on them. So what used to be kind of like, you'd have 8 to 12 direct reports in this sort of spans and layers thing, and there'd be never 6 layers between the CEO and that frontline team member. Well, these days, now, minimum, it seems that team sizes start at 16 and then go up to 50. So to your credit, how are you supposed to have great coaching conversations, performance management, just normal development and sort of being a leader and a manager at the same time with a team of 50? So these are consequential decisions that are being made that are adding stress and anxiety on this middle cohort. And so what happens? Not only do you have that stress and anxiety going up, performance issues will ensue, but then they start looking for other roles. They're like, well, can I possibly work for a company or organization that actually is pro midlife, knowing that I am this sandwich generation leader and all these things going on? And so what happens is, again, you start having talent exodus. And that is, again, another thing that could be thought through when you look at these 3 River Rock Ruby eras and say, oh, wow, wait a second. If we hollow out our rocks, who's going to become our rubies one day? And again, it's just some short-sighted thinking there.
Have you worked with an organization and gotten them thinking in this rivers, rocks, rubies construct? And if so, what changes do you see them making to make it better?
No organization specifically yet, because I've kind of been immersed in the development of the body of work, but in the research and the interviewing and then the working with organizations on pieces to the puzzle I was trying to put together, there are lots of good lights of hope around the world. An example are companies like L'Oreal and British Columbia Lottery Corp in my home province in Canada here in BC. So they have instituted phased retirement programs. So instead of you ducking out off a cliff at the age of 65, they ask you if you'd like to phase that out over 3, 4, or 5 years and maybe go from 100 to 80 to 60 to 50% time. We'd love that. We'd love to support you, and we get to sort of use you still for that period of time over those 3, 4, 5 years. Like, how fantastic is that? We'd love to keep you around and learn from you and help you onboard your replacement or whatever the case may be. Those types of programs are pretty good. Unilever has another program, which is really neat. It's called U-Work. And what they do is they allow you, whether you're River, Rock, or Ruby, they're thinking about the longer term play for their talent composition. U-Work allows you to basically have a side hustle. So as long as you're not in competition with Unilever, you can start your own gig, you can work for another gig, and it's sort of up to a percentage basis or a number of hours per week. But as long as you're doing your job, and as long as you fit that in somehow, they promote it so that you have these new learnings and new opportunities to then potentially also bring back into Unilever. So there's lots of good examples. It's just that there's no big, massive one, hey, we've become pro-age and we're going to do everything as I'm recommending.
One of your other terms is experience dividend. What does that mean? What does it look like in a real company?
So I wrote, first of all, the book like an album. So side A, side B. So side A are the problems. So those are the problem tracks. So that's the age debt. If you flip the album over or get to side B on the book, the experience dividend essentially, look, you can turn debt into a dividend if you sort of erase your thinking, at least evolve it. And the three kind of really good examples that are nucleus points, I call them as follows. One is the longevity lens. The second is the wisdom wheel. And the third is the career canvas. What I'm asking the leader to consider, whatever you're like small, medium-sized business, you're a unit leader, maybe you're a big company, it doesn't matter, public sector. The longevity lens is basically you saying, okay, how are we going to be more age inclusive in our culture? So our job descriptions, the fact that people are living longer and having open conversations about that, the fact that those rocks and some Ruby women suffer, 52% of them suffer from perimenopause, premenopause, and menopause. What are we doing about that? And so on. So it's just like these longevity items we never really talk about, but if we were to become more age inclusive and pro-age, maybe we should. So that's number one. Number two, on the wisdom wheel, this is actually like going back in time a little bit and saying, well, might we allow apprenticeships? How can someone shadow someone so we learn from them? How do we make sure we don't terminate Rubies by not capturing their wisdom and then sharing that? There's a great example of AI. So why not have a whole bunch of cameras or contraptions whereby we are capturing the knowledge of people and then using AI not only to capture, but then to put that into nuggets of learning so people could learn from customer relationships that people have but never talk about, or how you actually run the line and that production line, and then again, share that. So wisdom, so mentoring, coaching, rotations, etc. The career canvas is, again, my point of taking a very large match and setting the career ladder on fire. And so this is where, again, small, medium-sized businesses do this because they're told to by edict, I suppose, from past lore. And then large organizations still do this. So the only way is up. Terrible song. But that's not the way our career should go either. So they should be multifaceted, multi-directional. What's wrong with a 48-year-old taking a 2-year downspin and saying, you know what, I want to be director for a while. I'm going to be an individual contributor. Is that cool? Why not? Is there a stigma? Like we call it demotion. Why do we call it demotion? That's terrible. No, you're just taking a break, but you're still full-time employed. You just don't want to run a team anymore. But that organization shouldn't lose you if you want to do something different for a while. That's what I'm getting at. The canvas is you and the team or the organization rethinking about every career goes up. In fact, it could be multi-directional. And like a good painter, you have all these paint colors and brushes. So how might we basically paint a better picture using the canvas of opportunity?
So much of this just strikes me as you're talking about this, Dan. HR people and culture organizations are so pressed for time. They're besieged. They're getting pressured to hollow themselves out and use AI across everything. And they don't have time to think about this. And I think an enlightened manager, if somebody 48 years old came to them and said, I want to downshift for a couple of years because I've got something going on in my personal life, and then I'd like to go back to doing what I was doing. An enlightened manager and an enlightened HR person and an enlightened organization, you put all those things together and that might happen. But the odds of each of those things being in place is certainly well less than 100%. Multiply them all together, you get something probably approaching zero. And I think that's why this doesn't happen so much. It's just because it requires work and it's so antithetical to the way that people tend to think about the career ladder and the idea that if you step down, it's permanent. You can't come back to what you were doing.
I do love the word antithetical. And sort of this type of thinking is anathema to the kind of longer term rethinking that any organization of any size really needs to be doing. Because again, if I were to chat with you in 10 years' time, JR, and we sort of say, okay, so 2026, Dan, you said demographic disruption is an inevitability. The maths on this one. So 10 years later, 2036, how did those organizations do? And the good ones will be making the plans and preparations now, do exactly what you said, to carve out time in calendars to say, well, what will this organization be like in 5 years or 10 years? But if you're not a leader who suggests to everyone, you know what, we got to invest a little time in this, then that conversation you and I have in 10 years' time from now will be talking about a lot of really broken organizations and people.
There's so much disruption going on right now. I haven't really felt this way since the internet era was blossoming 25, 30 years ago, just in terms of what's going on with AI. And I just feel like the sort of broader geopolitical sense and how people are thinking about those forces and their careers. And it just feels like the next 10 years are going to be really, really interesting. And it's hard to know how any of it's going to play out.
I don't disagree. The only thing I would disagree with, though, is that we're running out of people. And so if if we're running out of people, that sort of says to me there's a supply-demand scenario that is unfolding that we might want to pay attention to.
Apart from the fact that we've got the supply-demand inequity that you're talking about, you also make an argument that thinking about this more creatively actually helps with innovation, not just filling seats, but also with doing better work, driving more innovation and growth. How so?
Well, if I told you that in Japan, adult diapers outsell baby diapers, you know, it might be a bit of a shock for those that haven't heard that before. And it's true. South Korea, the same thing, by the way. But the diaper manufacturers, when they started looking at the demographics, they're like, wait a second, maybe we should start thinking about what that consumer pool looks like. And if it's shifting demographically, maybe we should shift with the times. And so there's a hidden point in this book. And so the book is called The Future Work is Gray. Gray is meant to be a double entendre, which is, yes, we are aging as society, but also there's fog. And so gray can mean fog. So what I'm trying to do with the fog is to lift it. And then when you lift that fog, what should there be is hope and opportunity, which is why the cover is gold. So I think there is a future of work is gold opportunity. And so whether you're looking at that from what consumer opportunities, what business opportunities, what B2B opportunities are there as society ages, then you're kind of like, oh, wait a second, we can put our heads together here and maybe think about different ways in which to help. And this isn't just we need more elder care homes and healthcare options. Yes, we do, but that's not the end of our innovation that we should be thinking about. If you get intergenerational rivers, rocks, and rubies, thinking creatively about what we might do economically from a production, innovation, output perspective, maybe you come up with your own adult diaper strategy, and maybe there's something else metaphorically there that actually helps you for the long term.
It's hard to do a follow-up question when we've been talking about adult diapers and baby diapers, but I'm going to do my best. So for an organization that's thinking about this, somebody picks up your book, reads it, thought-provoking to them, what do you want them to start doing, stop doing, and continue doing?
Well, it's not in the right order in the book because I just wrote it in a way that sort of just said, hey, you can pick up any track, because I don't even call them chapters, but you can pick up any track whenever you want. But I do think that if I were to sort of pin the tail on the proverbial age donkey right now, I think ageism is the one that is the immediate remedy opportunity. And what's happening? So you see on one end, older rubies, even rocks, scrubbing their tenure from LinkedIn. They're embarrassed or finding that they're not getting through to the recruiters or talent teams or even hiring managers because they might have worked for 6 years between 1995 and 2001, and that's dated on their LinkedIn. So there's this, how old are you inferiority complex that has enveloped the Western world, as if we're not supposed to say our age, as if me looking into this camera today isn't 55. I'm supposed to be 38. So that is ageism, but that's self-ageism, meaning I am embarrassed by the inevitability that I am aging. We all age. So that needs to be self-corrected. But then you've got the age against the machine, as I call it, issue, and that's the organization. So whether that's talent teams, hiring teams, HR teams who use ATS and are actually consciously looking for age and to scrub those people out from the potentiality of being hired or getting to the interview stage, that's wrong. That's ageism. Ageism is how you craft your job descriptions. Ageism is how you craft who gets considered for promotion or the projects inside your organization. Ageism is how you communicate in the town halls by recognizing only the rivers, or vice versa, never recognizing the rivers. So all of this has opportunity. If we just looked in the mirror and said, you know what, we all end up 6 feet under. Age is inevitable. So what is it that we're doing to be more age inclusive rather than age negative and ageists? Then I think that's the opportunity, JR.
And if people start working well into their 60s or their 70s, maybe even into their 80s, what do you think is going to change most about the way that the workplace works?
There's going to be, well, first of all, some practical change, right? So Westpac is a bank in Australia who took a look at their workforce. They got 33,000 people or so. They recognized that just about 22% of the workforce was over the age of 55. They're like, whoa, that's like 7-ish thousand people. Right? So maybe we could do some ergonomic accommodations for whether they're bank tellers or things that's happening within their actual branches and so forth. So they made a conscious decision to be pro-age, age inclusive, and then look at things ergonomically. When I was visiting a couple car manufacturer plants in Japan, they too have done the same thing on the lines, both with the use of AI and VR headsets, and just the way in which the lines are crafted to be more pro-age for potential physical labor work, just as these examples I'm giving you, then can be done in a way that's actually a little bit more healthy, I would say. So you got that, the physical ergonomic kind of easy, low hanging fruit kind of stuff. But then you've got, again, does anyone out there think that they're training people to understand their unconscious and conscious bias of age? So do we have ageist training or ageism training? Are we actually a pro-age company by talking a good game and putting up posters of people of 3 different eras, but actually not teaching people how and what they're doing from a bias perspective and enlightening them? So that, to me, is, again, conversations at a leadership level. Yes, your line leader or you as a team lead could be having it, and good on you if you are, but it is a conscious culture change opportunity that I think the C-suite and the senior leaders need to be having.
Obviously, you wrote this book because you saw a gap in the way that people were thinking about this. Having now gone down the rabbit hole of looking at this very deeply, where are you in terms of optimism, pessimism about where organizations are and what the future holds for us?
It's a great question. Like, I've been an executive at TELUS, at SAP for about 18 years, running culture, leadership development, all those CLO capacities. And I never thought about age, not once. So if I consider myself semi-smart with a bunch of degrees, running culture change and the development of leaders and teams for 2 organizations over nearly 2 decades, and I never once thought about it. So I'm trying to perhaps remedy a little bit of my own past mistakes and to enlighten others that certainly, I would argue, aren't thinking about it either.
Well, good. And obviously, now that the book is out in the world, the conversation will blossom because people will be able to pick it up and start talking about it more. And I appreciate you taking time, especially given that this is launch week, to talk with me today. So thank you, Dan.
It's been great to chat with you, Jared. Thanks for the opportunity, and just appreciate the new friendship.
All right. So what would I like you to take away from the discussion with Dan just now? First, this idea that the age debt is real. In most of the developed world, we have fewer people coming into the workforce than we do leaving the workforce. And it's going to compound just given what's going on with population trends. And so the idea of age debt really reflects this demographic change as something that organizations and leaders really are ignoring. And the cost is starting to show up in talent gaps and disengagement and lost knowledge. And that's what is really providing the spark for Dan writing this book in the first place. Second, we talked about generational labels and how we often use them as a crutch and not really a strategy. And this idea of rivers and rocks and rubies rather than Gen XYZ. And the way we talk about this isn't just semantic. We need to rethink how we design teams and careers and leadership to reflect the fact that we have a multi-generational workforce and that we've got to create something which sustains itself over time and really gets the best out of all those populations, but also recognizes the life constraints that they're operating in and what they need from their professional lives at that point in their lives. Third is this idea of the experience dividend, really flipping on its head the idea that experience is just costly, older, unproductive workers, and starting to think about how do we actually get as much out of these people as possible and take advantage of them, potentially and alternate labor models from the traditional idea of a full-time person who just steadily rises up the corporate ladder. This idea of getting more out of these people will be especially critical as we are relying more on experience, especially when we're hollowing out junior roles with AI. And then finally is this idea that we've got to think differently about age in the workforce. The companies that are going to be successful probably aren't going to be the ones that are the youngest or the ones that are the most disruptive. They're going to be the ones over the long term that integrate talent across ages, skills, perspectives. And that's going to require redesigning careers, rethinking leadership, and letting go of some outdated assumptions about how long and how linearly people work. I invite you to subscribe to Career Sessions on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and others. If you found this discussion enlightening, and I hope you did, please sign up for my membership community, which is called Pathwise, and subscribe to our newsletter, which is called Path Wisdom. Thanks. See you next time.